Hello and welcome to the next episode of Accelerator Lab Wine Chats. You will notice it's Wine Chats because our special guest today, Margunn, is sitting in Lebanon. It is wine o'clock in Beirut, and she has kindly agreed to talk to myself and Cal about a very interesting topic and one that's very relevant to most of the country offices today who are in a process of onboarding their Accelerator Lab teams and going through the interview process. We are reporting today, Cal and I, from the edge of the volcano in the Philippines. It's a very special episode from a number of accounts. Today, we're going to talk about a very different way that the country office Lebanon has taken in terms of doing the interview process for the 3 positions for their Accelerator Lab team. They wanted to go ahead and hack the existing UNDP interview process, and we would like to hear a little bit more about their experience. What is it that they did, why, and what are some of the takeaways? And lastly, what are some of the tips and tricks that they can share with the rest of the network? So first of all, Margunn, thank you, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to speak to Cal and I today.
Thank you for having me.
So could you tell us a little bit why you wanted to pivot from a standard, or rather complement the standard face-to-face interview for your Accelerator Lab team?
I think for us, the primary motivation was that we wanted to attract unusual suspects for these posts. And we have a very strong innovation ecosystem in Lebanon. And these are unusual roles also for UNDP. So we didn't feel that the usual selection process would necessarily yield the best candidates. Because when you do a competency-based interview, you know, it's also learning by doing. So people who are in the system are well-versed in the process of these interviews and will do fairly well. Whereas some people who may not be as familiar with UNDP, but are really good innovators and are, you know, part of the ecosystem, wouldn't necessarily know how a regular process.
So in a way, you wanted to wrong foot the more traditional candidates, and at the same time open the space for the non-usuals to really open up the innovation and creativity and different way of thinking to come out.
Yes, absolutely. Also because we're looking for different profiles. No, we're looking for profiles that we don't currently have in the organization, to push the organization in a different direction.
Can you walk us through the process from end to end?
So what we did is that basically we got 2 sort of design experts to come in and help us design this challenge day and facilitate it, so that it was not facilitated by the sort of panel members from the office, but the 2 neutral people who are also experts in innovation and design. And then what we did is, I mean, you have the pre-recorded interview, which counts for 30%, and then you would have had the competency-based interview to count for 70%. We split that, thinking we may not be able to get away completely with, you know, without doing a competency-based interview at all. And so we split that for the challenge day to count for 45% and the competency-based interview for 25%, which was basically just, we saw that as an opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with the candidates following the challenge day, also to prod a little bit deeper in terms of their motivation and their sort of leadership, both experience and leadership styles. So what we did is we had a full day, sort of challenge day. We gave the candidates very little instructions in terms of what that day would entail. We basically told them to turn up at 8:30, you know, full of energy and a positive spirit. And we held it outside of the office at the Beirut Digital District, but which is a sort of hub for the ecosystem, but in a space that was sort of secluded enough for them to be able to retain their privacy as candidates, not really being sure that they had necessarily communicated to their colleagues and partners that they were applying for this job. So that was also something that we had to balance when we were doing a group exercise amongst, you know, with people who presumably some of them knew each other and some of them may be colleagues. And then we had, I mean, we ran the day from 8:30 up until I think 3:30 p.m. basically focusing the exercises on our urban mobility challenge, which is what we had submitted as one of our sort of frontier challenges that we wanted the lab to tackle. And we basically ran them through a sort of design thinking process on speed, basically with the primary motivation to see how they engaged, how they took initiative, how they communicated with each other in a fairly tense setting. I mean, in the end, they were also applying to the same positions, and knew that, you know, this was part of their recruitment process. I think, you know, it's a bit like an assessment center in many ways. But the primary focus was really on team dynamics. How well do they work in a team? You know, do they show empathy? Are they able to listen yet still get their points across? You know, can they collaborate across the teams that were set up? Can they negotiate? Can they compromise? Can they, you know, come to a consensus despite, you know, differing perspectives in the room? And I have to say, it was really a really interesting exercise. And we walked out of that day feeling very confident that we knew each and every candidate, and we knew, you know, what their strengths were, what their weaknesses were, and we could already envisage, you know, who would fit which profile. And so the competency-based interviews on day 2 were really just, I mean, ended up being a confirmation of what we had already seen on day 1. And the top candidates from day 1 were still the top candidates at the end of the interview process.
Great. Could you give us a sense of how many people were participating, and in this kind of design thinking process on speed, what were the steps and what was the challenge that they worked on?
So we had 9 candidates. We had 9 different candidates, some of whom had applied for more than one post, right? Because at the beginning of this process, we were not given the green light to appoint or to offer the 3 jobs, you know, across the sort of candidate pool across the 3 positions, right? So what we did is we made, you know, we also did some outreach and made sure that there's that we knew of, or there's that we encouraged them to apply for more than one job. Yeah, if they were really interested in the lab, they would apply for more than one job, which meant that in the last round, we had several candidates who had applied for 1 or 2 or 3, I don't think 3, but had applied for at least 2 positions. And so we also had some flexibility to assign roles at the end of it. We then had the 2 facilitators, and then we had a panel of 5 country office staff who also then participated in the discussions and in the group work. And we ran it as a very sort of informal day. And in terms of the actual sort of structure of the day, we spent the first part of the day basically getting to know each other, talking a little bit about the lab and, you know, the opportunities and their expectations, which was important because they walked into this fairly blind in terms of what the day was going to be. And I think they were were positively surprised that they were thrown into a group challenge, which they had not expected. And I think the feedback at the end was that was very, very positive, and they really enjoyed the challenge of you know, being on the team with people who essentially were also competing for the same positions, and understanding that, you know, we're also part of the system, and whether or not they would be successful in the end, they would still be part of the lab, and, you know, we would want to keep that engagement going with them. So we did an icebreaker game also to get rid of some of the nerves. And then we started on the urban mobility challenge, where we asked them to define their teams themselves, which was quite interesting. And it's a tricky task to do when you don't really know each other very well. And what was interesting there was that actually the team that we ended up with at the end, all the members were in the same team on that challenge day. Somehow they found each other immediately.
That's incredible.
Yeah, no, it was very, very interesting. And it was very clear that these were the top candidates, even in terms of our sort of second recommended candidates, which was very interesting. And then we took them through, I mean, yeah, a fairly standard design process in terms of doing a sort of empathy map and creating personas, you know, brainstorming, ideation, and sketching out solutions, and a very, very rapid prototyping. And throughout that process, we also threw in some wild cards, and we gave particular roles to particular people who we felt had been overpowered by some of their team members who were perhaps more introverted or a little more quiet, but that we felt had the potential and had, you know, had contributions that they wanted to make. So we gave them additional roles in the group discussion to bring that out a little bit more. And then at the end of the day, they had to basically walk us through the process, what they had come up with, you know, the solutions that they had identified, and we would ask sort of questions back and forth, and ask them also to different people in the group, and they got to comment on each other's solutions also. So that was basically it. I mean, it's a standard process in that sense. The unusual part is that you are evaluating individuals as they go through the process.
And just one thing that really stands out from what you've just said is we've heard that the feedback from the participants was very positive. But what was the feedback from UNDP colleagues who were part of this process? And I ask this from two perspectives. One, that you obviously took extra time to think this through and to plan it out and to execute it. So it is the deviation from the norm that you didn't really have to do, but you did it anyway in order to really create the space where you can identify the right type of profiles and check for team dynamics. This is one. And two, simply because it stands as a pretty massive deviation to what we usually do. So could you tell us a little bit how did UNDP colleagues react to what happened?
I mean, I think, across the board, we found it incredibly helpful. And very interesting. And we immediately, during our debrief, basically started thinking, how can we take elements of this and incorporate it into our standard HR process? Is there, I mean, understanding that this is quite time consuming and takes a bit of effort, but at least for certain level of positions that we replicate. And if we can't replicate the day in its entirety, is there a way that we can somehow like bake in some sort of group exercise? Because we really felt at the end of the day that we knew who these candidates were. We know who we are hiring, you know, which is very different from having, you know, someone come in for a half-an-hour interview, answer a set of questions and leave the room again. Where you know how well they have done in terms of the interview, you may not necessarily understand who they are as people. And so for us, I think it was an easy call in the sense that we want to make sure we have hired the right team, because this is such an unusual team, we need to make sure we get it right. And because we don't do probation periods, you know, when you hire someone on an NOB post, we have to be confident that they can deliver what we're asking them to deliver.
And it's interesting that you say that one of the takeaways for you was that you got to know them much better. When we were recruiting, when the first notices went out for 180 positions across 60 countries, we held a number of AMA Ask Me Anything sessions for interested candidates so they can get to know us as an organization. I imagine that probably one of the value for the externals was also to get a bit of a sense of what is UNDP like as an employer.
And this is also something that came out in the feedback from them at the end of the day, that they really valued the engagement with us, with UNDP, and they wished that they'd had more time to do that. That the exercise was, it was short and it was intense, but they would have wanted also to have more inputs from our side, learn more about what the organization does, how we would approach this particular challenge, what is it that in our current program we're already doing, and so yeah, to get a sort of a broader sense of what UNDP is and does.
Suppose I'm a country office interested in applying this approach. Do you have any recommendations on maybe what you would do differently?
I'm not sure we would have needed to do the competency-based interview the way we did it. I think had we done this again, what we would have done is we would have, throughout the day, pulled participants out for a quick chat and then put them back into the group exercises. That's also a way of reducing the time and resources that it takes to go through this process. So you bake it into the agenda of the day, that you have sort of parallel pull-out sessions, candidate by candidate. And I know that there is already, I think both the Colombia and Jordan office are thinking through how they can incorporate some element of group exercises in their processes. And I think, it's, for us at least, it has been very, very useful.
So you mentioned Colombia and Jordan, which is fantastic that you're already sort of spreading the practice. If you were to give 3 tips to a country office who was planning to do something like this to complement their face-to-face interview, what are the most important 3 things that they should have in mind?
One is to set up a safe space and to be mindful of the fact that these are candidates who are, applying for a job that they may not get. And so that we're not exposing them, to their employers if they haven't communicated with their employers, but also to create a safe space among the candidates that is sort of Chatham House rules. That they don't, leave that day and then say, oh, by the way, guess who I saw here, and guess what, this guy perhaps isn't very happy in his current role, and, fishing for new things. I think that was a fear that we had, that, we were very concerned that would scare some candidates off.
Interesting. So did you communicate this to the candidates up front?
We had them sign a pledge before they entered the room.
Interesting. Okay.
That there would be no social media, that they would be respectful of each other's privacy, and that, what happens in that room stays in that room.
That's a really good tip. So that's one. What about the other 2?
And then I say, go for it. Be bold. Yeah, if you don't have the resources, it's worth investing in bringing in a consultant to do it. A consultant who would not have been eligible to apply, I think, also, so that you don't have any conflict there. I don't know, and then be flexible with what you do with the interview afterwards, or alongside, that you then focus that on, things that you didn't see come through in that group exercise or the challenge day, particularly for those candidates who are a little more introverted and quiet, that you also help them be the best that they can be.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Margunn, for walking us through the process that you went through, and congratulations also just on thinking about an alternative way of doing this. For all of the listeners out there, we really want to thank you for joining us for another, well, I guess this time, an Accelerator Labs wine chat. If you have interesting things that you have done or lessons learned from your recruitment process, we'd love to hear about them. We'd love to share them back with the community. Thank you very much for joining us.